Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hunting for Silver Linings. Today is Friday, January 15. I am the chapter director for Startup Grind Grand Rapids here in Michigan in the Great Lakes region of the U.S. Nice and snowy. It's winter here in this side of the planet. And then I'm joined here by Mr. Adrian Smith, a fellow chapter director that I had the pleasure of meeting in person while the Globe's chapter directors were challenging each other to bowling games, a nice classic American sport here. Back in last February, one of the last times I was actually around human beings. So, Adrian, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having today's edition of the podcast. Is the bald white guys with beards?
I should have sent you the hoodie.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the main reasons why we love to do this program is because it's an opportunity for chapter directors around the planet to learn about each other, because our brothers and sisters are working so hard on our own ecosystems, and we might not have an opportunity to do an in-person global until maybe next year. So want to get to know and learn about you. So can you tell us, give us a little background on Adrian and then how you plugged into Startup Grind?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up here in North Carolina, in Winston-Salem. I ended up going to undergrad focusing in sustainable agriculture at a small liberal arts school, less than 1,000 students. It's called Warren Wilson. It's absolutely beautiful. It's outside of Asheville. It's got a 300-acre organic farm, 1,000 acres of trails in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So there's a lot of opportunity to goof off and skip class and go swim in the river, but I managed to learn a thing or two. I moved back home to Winston-Salem and started my first business doing landscape design and install. I love that. I grew that company, $20,000 and $30,000 monthly recurring revenue, 8 or 9 employees, kind of in the busy months. But after a few years, I started to get, I want to say bored, but I thought my time could be better spent with a bigger impact on my community rather than building pretty gardens for wealthy folks. And so I started looking around for MBA programs that focused on sustainability. And I came across the program at University of Colorado Boulder out in Colorado. And so I kind of handed the company over to my brothers. I moved out to Colorado. I went out a year early so I could get in-state tuition. And during that time, I tried and failed at a food-based startup, and then finally applied to the program, got in, and that was kind of an inflection point in my life where I didn't start off in finance, but in fact, I was very terrified of corporate finance and nearly failed my first course first semester. But I ended up actually getting a focus in entrepreneurial finance, and I took a few courses that totally changed the way that I viewed finance, including venture capital law, which is co-taught by Brad Bernthal, who's a professor at the law school, and Jason Mendelson, who was a founding partner at Foundry Group. And so that was an amazing course. And then I was taking entrepreneurial finance with Chris Leach at the business school. And those two together were transformative so that I could understand how to use early stage finance, both from the entrepreneurial and from the investor perspective, to drive the outcomes that I want to see. In addition to that, I got to go to Cuba to learn about social entrepreneurship. I got to volunteer with some nonprofits in a consulting capacity. I got to run the MBA student-led consulting firm, Entrepreneurial Solutions, which runs every summer. We blew it out of the water. We sold the most projects of any company or any group of students in the last 20 years. And so then, after that, I moved back home to North Carolina, where my family is. I had a girlfriend who's now my wife. So I got plugged into the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and it was a great time to do it because the ecosystem was really just in its infancy, and I'd say we're starting to crawl now, right? So there were some organizations around for a couple of years, including Flywheel Co-working and New Ventures Accelerator and the Center for Creative Economy, where I first landed working with Margaret Collins at Center for Creative Economy, helping to run an accelerator that supports the creative industries and some other programs there. I then moved on to Mixer Makerspace, where I was the program director and helped stand up STEAM education program and the Industry Hill Block Party, which is a big annual festival. And then I did a lot of grant writing in that role as well. New organization had just got started, now on the board there. And then I moved over to Flywheel Co-working as their program director, running Startup Grind. So that's how I initially got involved with Startup Grind, and I've run monthly events in 3 different locations. So in Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and in Davidson. So we were serving multiple markets. It was a ton of fun. Got to meet a lot of people. We're also running Techstars startup weekends, and we run a lot of courses. I took over the director position for the New Ventures Accelerator as well. And so we run, for the last 5 years, we've run one cohort of companies through that each year, making equity investments on average $50,000 per company. And then I would work with them over 3 months so they could hit all their milestones as they move along to MVP release or, a Series A or Series C raise. And then at the beginning of 2020, I said, you know what, we've got this foundation, the Flywheel Foundation, that's been kind of running in the background for the last 5 years as a financial vehicle mostly, so we could accept grants and raise sponsorships to support things like Startup Grind. Well, why don't we take a focus on that and actually build out a legit board of directors? And so that's what we did. I moved into the executive director role, brought on a really fabulous board of directors, and we've kind of shifted the focus to really impact entrepreneurship. And we're running Startup Grind, Techstars Startup Weekend. We have a learning management system called Flywheel.courses, where we do early and growth stage courses that we've created, and we also host third-party curriculum for other programs across the state. And then finally, we're raising a $5 million early stage fund called Equilibrium Impact Ventures that will invest in companies that are solving for the social determinants of health. And so we'll be first money in, $75,000 to $125,000 check sizes. We're working with nonprofit foundations as kind of a primary source of capitalizing the fund through program-related investments. There's a lot of kind of unique characteristics of the fund, and we're super excited about it.
That's a nice turn of events from when I spoke to you last February. Congratulations on all that work.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a great year, despite all of the craziness that's happened. On the ecosystem side, most of the organizations in Winston have been able to kind of eke through it, while it was difficult for everybody financially. And some folks had to kind of change their business models a bit. Everybody was able to kind of pull through so far, and we're looking at, I think we can start to see the other side of it now.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the creation and iteration of early stage ideas and companies, we're often asking the people, the founders that we're working with, like, how old do you know your customer? Do you have a customer or do you have an idea, right? And so the pandemic has really forced that question to be to the forefront, especially as the customers rediscovering themselves. Like what's
Yeah,
like
and I think it's a healthy practice for all ecosystem partners to go through regularly.
Mhm.
And it makes me think of the Startup Community Way, a book by Brad Feld and Ian Hathaway that I just finished yesterday. They're really looking at providing practitioners like us how to approach ecosystem building and measurement. And so that's one thing I would look to other chapter directors across Startup Grind and to learn from is how are you measuring the success of the ecosystem? Because I think they make a great point in that book. It's not just more and more and more. It's not, hey, we need more events, we need more funding, we need more companies started. We need better of each of those, right? Mm-hmm. And so it gets really complex in how to actually measure. But I'd love to hear from you and from other Startup Grind directors what you guys are doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Again, pandemic, rips the roof off, and we get to really analyze, what's working, what's not been working, take that pause, and then double down, right? We have a conversation on ecosystem building coming up later this month, and I'll make sure to forward you the contact information with our guest. It's Professor Art Markman from University of Texas, Austin. And he's the director of the IC Squared Institute, and they work with small emerging ecosystems around the globe in what you're talking about. Like, what do we measure? How do we measure? How do we reinvest? How do we, grow our own ecosystem without trying to copy? We don't all have to be Silicon Valleys, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And how do you find your own unique identity?
And then do so regionally, because while it's important not to give everything away to AWS and Google and everyone else and have your cash spun out of your ecosystem to Walmart, for a US example, on the more retail and Main Street side, but it's still important to work with your regional partners. And this is something that I really was looking forward and am looking forward to learning from you, because you mentioned it earlier. You said, okay, well, yeah, we've visited different regions and we run this here in this location, in this location, in this location. That's really important for where you are on the planet, because your area has always had a very regional mindset, right? It's not like, oh, our village is great, get out of here. Can you talk to us about like the opportunity that is, and the challenges that that they were overcoming by working together across the geography?
I love that question. The Flywheel Foundation is kind of the sister organization to the Flywheel co-working space, right? Which is expanding regionally and using the foundation to support the co-working innovation spaces. And so that's kind of integral to our strategy in serving not just entrepreneurs, but we've got pastors, we've got service providers, we've got folks that are working with major corporations that are in the spaces. But I'll use a couple of examples to kind of show how we approach working regionally. So we are about to open a new location in Cabarrus County, in a little town called Concord, North Carolina, which is just outside of Mecklenburg County, where Charlotte is. Charlotte's the largest city in North Carolina. And so they are looking at how do we attract and retain existing businesses to Concord and to Cabarrus County, as well as how do we develop an entrepreneurial ecosystem to really get early stage companies started here. And we've got some kind of unique regional assets, like the North Carolina Research Campus that has all of the major research universities across North Carolina have a presence there. We've got the North Carolina Food Innovation Lab. And we've got some old existing players there in the old Cannon Mill and some others. And so as Flywheel came in, we started working with the Cabarrus County Economic Development Organization, the Chamber of Commerce, Small Business Center, and others to really make that innovation center a community-owned and operated place that uses Flywheel as kind of the backbone of it. And so we've redeveloped this beautiful old bank building that's right downtown, and we've created this entrepreneurship leadership council, which is the ecosystem, bringing in all of the ecosystem leaders to help guide, like identify the gaps, right? Where are the gaps in the programs or the funding or wherever, and try to fill those. So right now we're building a mentorship program, and then kind of co-locating under everybody under one roof is really important, so that as an entrepreneur comes in, they can quickly be kind of sorted into whichever ecosystem partner is best suited to serve them. At the same time, we are expanding the New Ventures program, the accelerator. So this year, we're actually running 4 accelerators simultaneously, and one will be based in Concord and will be around health, wellness, and nutrition. So really working off of those regional, the capacity that's already existing there. So we can tap into the North Carolina Research Campus. We say, hey, you guys have amazing resources here. Why don't we bring in some folks as mentors? As we're starting to build this ecosystem, we want to catalyze involvement from investors. And so the New Ventures Accelerator program is really the first local investment opportunity that they have for early stage companies, right? So we work with them to get that going. And then as other investment opportunities come in surrounding the Innovation Center or kind of external to New Ventures program, the investors are already there. They're looking for opportunities. They're excited. They're volunteering. And so we're doing that same thing in Lexington. We've got a new location called Greenworks of Lexington, which is a big ag tech innovation center. So we're standing up an ag tech accelerator. We're looking at we're developing a location down in Greenville, South Carolina. And then locally here in Winston, we're partnering with a local nonprofit called Hustle that serves Black and Brown founders and women founders and underestimated founders. And so we're going to put together a Black founder focused accelerator and kind of look across the state for funding as while there are other programs kind of popping up. I was talking to one of my colleagues in Charlotte about this earlier this week. There's 2 or 3 different Black accelerators, and I say that with air quotations because they don't actually provide any funding. So it's a curriculum-based program that these companies go through with lots of mentorship, but they don't get any funding, and so it's not a true accelerator. And so we're trying to deliver that true accelerator experience and pull funding from across the state from lots of different private individuals and organizations that are interested in supporting Black founders. And so those are kind of a couple of the ways that we're looking at regional expansion, and we're acting as kind of that interstitial tissue that can, we've got our eyes on what's available in Concord and what's available in Lexington and what's available in Greenville, what activities are happening, and when appropriate and possible, we can put those together. We also do that through our Flywheel.courses program, right? So as we're developing a new program, new courses, and building on the courses that are already made, we're being very purposeful about reaching out to experienced startup professionals across the state who are Black, who are Latinx, who are Asian, who can lead these courses and show, hey, yeah, I've got this experience that goes far beyond just me as a startup founder or me as a Black person. And so then we can use these courses to go into new markets as well. So we're working with affiliates who are running co-working spaces across North Carolina and South Carolina, or entrepreneurial ecosystem organizations like chambers or whomever who might not actually have a space, but they can offer those courses to their constituency, and they can get a new kind of line item revenue generator, and more entrepreneurs can get a solid curriculum. So yeah, those are some of the ways that we're looking at supporting the region. And I think it takes me back to Startup Grind's values, and the give first, give before you take, which ties in so well with my education at Boulder, from the Boulder thesis and everything. It's really just giving without expectation of reciprocity, and maybe one day down the line something will come back to you. You don't know when, you don't know how, you don't know from whom, but it really, it has a personal psychological benefit in the immediate term, where you feel better. It feels good to do good things. But I think also it's not an altruistic mantra, because there is likely to be benefit to you and to your organization long term, and I think it's a smart way of doing business.
Well, it addresses both sides of that marketplace. Like it doesn't say give and stop there. Before you take. It says take, but let's give first. Right. So
yeah.
Maybe digging a little deeper into this regional thing that's going on, I'd like to learn a little bit more about the regional mindset. This predates your crawling ecosystem, which I would argue is maybe more in the toddler wobbly walking, because after 100 some conversations with ecosystems around the planet, what you're describing is fairly advanced, and even if you don't feel like it's advanced in practice or whatever, just against the backdrop of 100 some conversations, I would say, yeah, you're kicking some ass. You're doing great, Adrian. you're kicking some ass, and you're working so hard. You're doing a lot of things, but something that other ecosystems could learn from. And it's real interesting, because with the social upheaval that's happening in the US, it's global, but in the US specifically, your region isn't without its own, interesting history, complicated history. But it also, like, you have this mindset of working across like geography and reaching out and helping different communities. So you're friendly not just to the people that are in your like real hyper circle, right? Because a lot of communities are like, we're the friendliest people we know, and it's just it's those 20 people. Like, everyone's welcome to the table as long as you're these 20 people.
Yeah.
Maybe let us all know a little bit about the regional mindset. Is it originally like very entrepreneurial? Like, do you have generational pulls against entrepreneurism where it's like, oh no, that will never work, or like what's it like?
Yeah, so here in Winston-Salem, we have a very interesting history. We were dominated in the early 1900s by a couple of major corporations, RJR Tobacco Company, which I went to RJR High School, and Hanes Brands Textile Company. I went to Hanes Middle School, right? So our town was built on these two brands primarily, though we had many others, Wachovia, BB&T, some big banks, Sara Lee, some other major corporations. Over the years, I think kind of in the 80s in particular, with globalization starting to happen, and with the health impacts of tobacco really coming to the forefront. And then later in the 90s with NAFTA and with the big tobacco lawsuits, our city was destroyed economically, right? All of our factories moved overseas. All of the corporate headquarters were either moved to Atlanta in the case of Reynolds, or they didn't have as much revenue coming in, right? And so they weren't able to support the city in the same way. And all of the workers, for the most part, were kind of displaced without anywhere to go. And they didn't have the education and the jobs training to go anywhere. And so that was the status quo for since then. And it's still the status quo. And we have one of the worst economic mobility KPIs here in Winston-Salem out of any city in the country. If you're born poor, there's less than 5% chance of you moving out of that kind of strata in the income levels, right? You're going to die poor, and you're going to stay in the same place that you've been your whole life because you don't have the resources to change that. Likewise, with food access, we are regularly in the bottom 10 and sometimes dead last in access to food. We've got huge food deserts where, in the western part of the city, there's this one area that has like 5 or 6 grocery stores within a couple of blocks of each other. On the eastern side of the city, there's nothing. It's corner stores, convenience stores, it's all white bread, highly processed. What you can get is very low quality, not healthy food when you can get it. All right, so these are some of the social determinants of health KPIs that I'm focused on as a result of kind of this reliance on big business for many decades of our history. Now there's an understanding that we need a big tent strategy. We need to, sure, look for the whales, try to bring in some big companies. We've got amazing assets. We've got a big international airport. We've got a small regional airport. We've got major factory, advanced manufacturing, all of that. But we also need to develop our own startups, homegrown startups that have the ability to grow very, very quickly and become big companies. And at the same time, we need to encourage small business. We need to encourage retail and food, restaurants, food trucks, all of that. And so I think that with the leadership of some of the high net worth individuals in town, along with the Chamber of Commerce, the city government, they've really accepted and included the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And in turn, the whole ecosystem is super collaborative. I think it's still very fragile. I think, another recession would likely take out a couple of organizations and limit the entire ecosystem's ability to support entrepreneurs. But we're super collaborative. And when I bring people into this ecosystem from outside, say, come on, sit in on one of our ecosystem meetings. It's an all hands on deck. Hey, what's everybody doing? Where are the gaps? What's something we can all build together? These folks always leave saying, this is the most collaborative ecosystem I've ever been a part of. And it's something that we're all very proud of, but it takes constant work. You have to work at it. You have to give first. Mm-hmm. And I visited a lot of other entrepreneurial ecosystems, kind of scouting for startups to invest in, that kind of thing. And I've seen people put up walls. They've got their elbows out, and it's their turf, and they don't want to lose another entrepreneur to Atlanta tech stars. They don't want to, you know, have Rise of the Rest Fund come invest, and then that entrepreneur is able to relocate to some bigger tech city. And I think some of this is changing now with the, it's post-pandemic. It's a lot more distributed and flat in that way. But in the past, that's been my experience, and I think ultimately those folks end up hurting the startups that they're trying to support. Right? They're limiting the resources that are available to them. And you see that even within ecosystems. There might be an entrepreneurial support organization that vies for another on funding. And we do that here. We don't have a cohesive funding strategy amongst our partners to say, all right, these are some programs that we can all go out together. And we do some of this at an ad hoc, but at the end of the day, we're still competing for the same funding dollars from the same folks in a very competitive way. And so I see that, right now we're doing good work. We're bringing that collaborative nature across the region through our co-working innovation spaces and through our investment funds. But I think it's always going to be tenuous, and it's always going to be largely based on who's around the table. How big is your table, and how inclusive is your table? Mm-hmm. And I think that's another thing that my organization needs to work on, and that we're trying to do with the help of Startup Grind. Actually, our Latinx community here in Winston-Salem is not well represented in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We have a wonderful organization called Soy Emprendedor, who supports high school aged entrepreneurs. And so I'm putting together a Startup Grind event to bring in hopefully some folks from Mexico Startup Grind, so that we can kind of share stories, share assets. We bring in Soy Emprendedor, we hear from the students, and we let the Latinx community in Winston-Salem know that, hey, Flywheel Foundation is here with tons of resources that are available for you, and maybe that'll give me an opportunity to practice my Spanish a little bit more too.
Yeah, that's you've just described a lot more that you're involved with. So it's can you talk a little bit about what your region is really well known for as far as like sectors or industries? I mean, you mentioned, that infrastructure, you've got it. You've got the manufacturing, you've got some logistics infrastructure, you've got banking, you've got access to, you're sitting pretty as far as like regionally in access, but like, what are you producing? What are you hot for?
Yeah. And so earlier I mentioned, still trying to find regional identity, which, we've got this old history in tobacco and textiles, and I think there's still a lot of opportunity there. But we're also trying to figure out what are those regional verticals. What should we focus on? Is it best to go all in on a couple of verticals, or should we remain open until some leaders emerge naturally? And a couple of early leaders that we have now are health tech. Right? So we've got two major health hospital systems. Atrium Health. So Atrium just merged with Wake Forest Baptist Health, which is a major medical center and school locally, and then Novant Health. And so they're both located here. And Wake Forest Innovation Corridor is kind of this huge centrally planned urban innovation corridor. I think it's one of the largest in the world. They turned all of those old tobacco warehouses and cigarette rolling warehouses into really high quality office space and lab space. Right? So health tech is emerging as a really strong player, and we've got some really interesting companies coming out like Orbital RX, which is a pharmacy software technology that actually went through new ventures a few years ago, and they just partnered up with IBM Watson. And so they're helping to identify potential shortages in hospital systems and make sure all of the drugs are getting across. So they're kind of smoothing out any kinks in the supply chain across the world, really. And then Point Motion is another really cool one that I'm excited about. They came out of Boston and went through the Center for Creative Economy, Creative Accelerator, which is called Velocity. They are doing, they're working with developmentally disabled children to use the webcam on their laptop or their computer to do fun games where you reach up here, it'll make a sound. You reach up here, it'll make a different sound. And so they can follow directions and make art and music while the program is collecting really valuable data on their ability to quickly respond to stimulus, right? And so then they're able to share that with doctors who wait list can be like 6 months out, right? It's really difficult to get in to see a doctor for the first time if you think your child might have a handicap. And so they're able to collect data regularly, early, often, and send that data to doctors so that they have a lot better, clearer picture of what that child is having issues with before they even see them. Another emerging vertical is aerospace. Right, so I mentioned we have a regional airport called Smith Reynolds. It has it's designated a national airport, which is a special designation that only about 80 airports in the country have, and it allows it to get additional federal funding for a variety of things. They're standing up an aerospace accelerator program out of that. There's a new Venture Winston grant program that's going to be funding companies that are both in aerospace and in health tech. And it's like 10 minutes down the road. It's really super accessible. And so those two, I think, are kind of leading the pack currently. We also, I mean, we've got a lot of great food companies. Mm-hmm. You guys know Texas Pete. Ironically, Texas Pete is from Winston-Salem. Krispy Kreme donuts are from Winston. So we got some other kind of goodies that come out of here. But yeah, I think that's kind of where we're heading currently. But time will tell. Sure. I think it's a yes and strategy.
Mm-hmm. So the way that you've been talking would lead someone to believe that you are like quite this bustling city, like Chicago. Can you just quickly let everyone know what's it look like?
Yeah, I laugh because we're a city of about 250,000. We're in what's called the Piedmont Triad, which is Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and High Point, which is, I would guess, 1 to 1.25 million total. Winston itself is really a beautiful city. We've got some nice buildings downtown. The old RJR building was like the precursor to, what's the building? It's like one of the most famous New York City skyscrapers. It looks like this one.
Empire State Building?
What's that?
The Empire State Building?
Empire State Building, yes, exactly. So it's beautiful architecture, super livable, and currently really high quality standard of living for the cost of living, right? Mm-hmm. So you can buy a house close to downtown for like $150,000, $200,000 that you can raise a family in and walkable to downtown.
Sure.
So in that way, it's really incredible. We're pretty close to the mountains, right? I just went and hiked Pilot Mountain, which is a 30-minute drive from downtown. Went up there yesterday. It was beautiful. We're about 4 hours from Wilmington on the coast. So it's great in that way. But it's definitely not a bustling city. So if you're looking for a ton of nightlife, clubs and dancing, first, that's probably not wise right now. But maybe later in this year, if you're looking for that stuff, we don't have a lot of those types of assets. We've got some really fun, divey bars, some really great cocktail bars, some awesome breweries. Some really good restaurants, although a couple of my favorites have shut down during the pandemic, which is really quite sad.
Yeah, in the U.S., your region is very well known for food.
Yeah. I mean, classic Southern cuisine. We've got some great fried chicken spots. Slappy's Chicken makes this like amazing hot chicken. It's slapping. There's like a new one coming up soon. There's Miss Aura's Chicken. There's some good spots for sure. But I think, a lot of people, we compete a little bit with Greensboro, and Greensboro has a lot higher immigrant population, and thus they have much wider and better selection of food. So a lot of times we'll go to Greensboro to get some international food.
So if I'm a young entrepreneur, and I know that we're coming up on time here. If I'm a super young entrepreneur, it sounds like there's no shortage of resources for me to get plugged in with my. Okay. And you also did mention earlier that there's some disparity in the community. If you're on this side of the community, that's one thing. If you're on that side, and now I'm hearing that up here, there's more immigrant community. Is it fairly easy for those folks to even know that these opportunities exist?
Yeah, it's getting better. I think there are some, I've been told that young Black folks in East Winston don't feel comfortable coming into downtown to, the big buildings with the co-working spaces and all of that kind of thing. And so I am trying to be very purposeful about reaching out, going to events that are outside of downtown, making sure that I'm networking with the organizations that they feel comfortable with, right? So there's still a lot of work to be done there. I think if anybody comes to Winston-Salem wanting to be an entrepreneur, they can easily get plugged in. And so I don't want that to be a barrier to anybody that might be listening and looking for a place to, relocate. But I think there is still work in making sure that the Black and Latinx community feel comfortable in these spaces, right? Because you think about these big, tall buildings downtown, they're not historically safe spaces for those communities.
Right.
And so that's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of hard work, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, we see some communities building not necessarily satellites, but entire whole co-working and food incubating facilities in those communities. Just because transportation infrastructure, everything else, all the other barriers that are already systemic for many, many years, it's a problem. It continues to be a problem. So
anyway. That's why I'm putting together all of our courses. I want those courses to be led by Black and brown folks, so that it's like, oh, okay, this person at least looks like me. This course might be something I'm interested in. But if it's a random person that doesn't know me and my face is on the front of this course, it might not seem like an accessible place for them. And so I'm thinking about those types of things just from a marketing perspective. Even it's important to make sure everybody feels welcome.
It's important. And so we have 1.5 minutes left, and I warned you about this question. It's the last question we ask every ecosystem builder. What can the global organization and network of chapter directors do for Adrian?
Yeah, well, thank you for the conversation and this question in particular. I mentioned the fund earlier, the Equilibrium Impact Ventures. We are early on in the fundraise, and we are tackling a pretty large mandate, which is the social determinants of health. And while my team, which is Katsanos, who's a three-time exited serial entrepreneur, Dr. Shante Williams, who is the CEO of a $25 million health tech fund out of Charlotte. We have a pretty wide angle on a lot of these topics. We don't know all the answers, right? And we don't know all the questions even. And so we're looking for subject matter experts in the social determinants of health across the country that can help advise us, that can help find pipeline companies, that can share best practices, emerging technologies and trends to solve for economic empowerment or access to healthcare or the built environment, climate resiliency. So I'd say if you're listening to this and you have somebody in mind that, hey, this is an expert in one of these social determinants buckets, I would love to meet them. I'd love to talk to them. I'd love to kind of pick their brain on what's happening in that space so that as we are going through due diligence with companies, we have the best information on those specific data points that we're going to be tracking. We've got 100+ KPIs pulled down from the social determinants that are a filter for our investment decisions, right? So just having that additional insight and viewpoint would be extremely helpful.
Awesome. Do you have a minute after I stop recording for me to give you a connection?
Of course.
Okay. Well, I want to say thank you so much for the generosity of your time there, Adrian. I'm really glad that we got to connect after a year of not seeing one another. So thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great to talk with you.